Welcome to today's episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. I'm your host, Marielle Schubert, three-time experienced gestational surrogate and intake manager for Surrogacy Mentor and Modern Parent Mentor, where our aim is a safe, ethical, and enjoyable surrogacy journey for all. Today, I'm excited to have experienced GC Sammi with us, and today's topic is Defying the Odds, how a single embryo transfer ended with a triplet pregnancy and a twin birth. So we're going to dive into all of that and how that happened. But why don't we start first? And Sammi, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your family and what made you want to become a surrogate?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So again, I'm Sammi. I am, yes, a two-time surrogate. I am a mom to one little daughter. She's now 7, but she was always our one and only. So my partner and I and her and our little dog, and yeah, so we're just kind of a normal family, I guess.
I love that. And so how did they react when you told them you wanted to become a surrogate? Like, how did surrogacy kind of even enter the picture?
Yeah. My first journey now was almost five plus years ago. So it's been a while since I really started the process myself. My partner, he definitely thought I was crazy when I first mentioned it and asking why would I want to do that? And, it was kind of the typical, I think, male partner response of that's weird. No, I don't want to do
Yep.
that. You shouldn't do that. But then I just kept talking about it over and over and over again and bringing it up. And, so finally I was like, well, I just did the first intake. Well, I got approved through that. And so I just kind of started going through the steps, but, now 2 journeys later, he never shuts up about it himself. So he loves it. My daughter was really young. She was only 2 when I first started. So for her, that's kind of all she's known is mommy helping other families or mommy being pregnant and babies going somewhere else. Which I think was nice that she was a little younger. So, but now she's 7 and she still talks about it. So yeah.
I love that. So for maybe this could be helpful for other women who have partners who are a little bit more on the hesitant side.
Yeah.
What were his kind of hesitations in all of it? I know you said he kind of wasn't into it. Did he just not really get it, or kind of what were his hesitations, I guess?
I think he just didn't get it, right? And I think
Yep.
that's fair. Why would a male partner really know a ton about that kind of stuff? It's not the norm, I think. So yeah, he was just hesitant because he didn't know. But it was my explanations of we're not genetically related. I'm the oven helping another family. There's contracts in place. It's everyone's protected. So I think explaining that logistic side of it helped. And yeah, so I think that was, and luckily as we know, the intake process for surrogacy takes a while. So I
Yep.
think because it wasn't I'm pregnant tomorrow, it gave us months to digest it and know it was going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much unknown when it comes to surrogacy, so demystifying the process
Yeah.
and setting some truths out there can definitely help partners along in getting that acceptance and kind of digesting oh, okay, that's not what I thought it was. Because I
Yeah.
think there's so much misinformation out there and so many wonderful Lifetime movies that really
Yeah.
set an unrealistic expectation of what gestational surrogacy actually is, that so many people, once they find out what it really is, are like, oh, all right, well, that I'm on board with.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. All right, well, let's get to it. So let's start at the beginning of your journey. I think we're all kind of wondering about the surrogacy math I dropped there in your
Yeah.
intro. It sounds like you had quite a unique journey. So let's just talk a little bit how we went from a single embryo transfer. We went from 132. So help us understand a little bit about how that math works.
Yeah. So it was my first journey and, again, 5 years ago, and I really didn't do a ton of like research that I probably should have done myself beforehand. So you know, I did exactly as you would expect. Got approved. I did the med appointments. I did medications. I went to the transfer and, yeah, we did a single embryo transfer. It was successful. I had positive betas and, yeah, again, it was wonderful in how textbook it was to start. Um, and then I went to my 6-week ultrasound as you do. I went to an outside monitoring clinic that wasn't my main clinic, as a lot of folks do, but they didn't specialize in fertility, really. They were just kind of like an imaging clinic. So I go there for my 6-week ultrasound, and she's doing it, and she could see something like, one, who knows what, a little flicker, but like it wasn't audible. And, but again, I was new to it all. So I was like, okay, that's fine. She was like, yeah, come back in a week. It's still really early. Again, it was barely 6 weeks. So no biggie. I went back a week later. So again, at that point, I was like 7 weeks. She does the ultrasound and she's kind of sitting there and looking at it for a while. And she asks me, how many embryos did you transfer again? And I just knew instantly. And I think I laughed, which was maybe not like the appropriate response, but like, I don't know what your response is to that. And I said, you see more than one, don't you? And she was like, yeah. She was like, I see 2 and maybe 3. And I was like, what? Because like nobody ever talks about it, that it can split 3 times. That's just like never a conversation. I've actually seen in other Facebook groups and people that are like, no, that's impossible. And I'm like, well, it's not. I saw it
Yeah.
with my own eyes. So she called, she was like a tech. So she calls in her boss and the whole thing. And they didn't even know how to measure multiples on their machine. Cause again, they like don't specialize in that at all. And, um, so instantly they were like, okay, you need to go see MFM. You need to go. We can't see you anymore. You need to go somewhere else. So I go, I call my doctor, which luckily partners with like an MFM clinic. So it was super easy.
Yep.
I think my first appointment with them was probably maybe like 8 weeks, 8.5 weeks. It was pretty soon after. Um, their ultrasound tech does the ultrasound, and she again was like, no, it's 2. I see 2. I was like, okay, that's fine. Like we can deal with 2. And then I went back again at 10 weeks. Yep, we see 2. They thought something was wrong with one of them. They said it looks like one is healthy and one has some abnormality. So now you need to go see a specialist. So luckily I live like 3 hours from a specialist. So I had to go to the specialist, and that was around, I think, 14 weeks by the time I got there, sometime around there. So I go to the specialist, and they start doing their ultrasound, and she goes, no, it's 3. There are 2 that are healthy and a third that isn't thriving. Mind you, throughout all of this, like I had the most wonderful intended parents ever. They were so mellow and so calm, and they really just kept asking how I was and like, are you okay? Like,
Well, how were you? Because you went from
yeah,
thinking you had 1, then
yeah,
maybe 3, then 2, well, then maybe 3, and
yeah,
now it's 3, but 1's not doing so well.
yeah,
How were like, how did you process that? Because that is like, there's a lot going on under any circumstance, let alone a surrogacy. I
yeah.
mean, wow.
I I'm a pretty like mellow person as it is, and you know what's going to be is going to be, and it was all out of my control. There was nothing I could do to change the situation. I also think, there are perfect matches for a reason, and my intended parents and myself, like this journey was meant for us because we all just they were very similar to me of like, well, okay, we'll do what we need to do. Or, I was more concerned for them of like, oh my gosh, you guys are going to get two babies. That was not the plan. Um, but
Like
they
a
were,
true surrogate.
yeah, yeah. And they were just so phenomenal. Always like worrying about me or asking how I was. But yeah, so for them, it was definitely a roller coaster of, is it two? Is it three? Now is it one? And like one's not thriving. Like now what do we do? So I remember being at the specialist when they confirmed and I could visually see at this point, and again, I was like 14 weeks. Um, there were two and then a third that wasn't thriving. So then we had to call the parents who they were expecting it was one and something was wrong with the second. And so we call them, and I remember the doctor, she just kind of started rambling and was like, so the two healthy babies, and she keeps going. And one of the parents kind of interjected and was like, wait, two healthy babies? Like I thought it was one healthy. So it was just, it was a
Yeah.
lot in 14 weeks. After that appointment, the decision was made that we would need to reduce the third that wasn't thriving. It was technically called a trap sequence, which is more common in twins, not triplets,
Okay.
where essentially I don't know the exact definition, but the trap sequence, it was growing, but it wasn't a baby, it wasn't a fetus, it wasn't healthy. It it was just kind of deformed, and it was there taking from the healthy babies. And so the safest route to save them was to reduce that one so it would quit like taking nutrients or whatever from um, the others. But I couldn't have the procedure done until I was 16 weeks. You have to be further along in the pregnancy. So I went home, and then 2 weeks later, I went back to the specialist. They did an RFA procedure, a radio frequency ablation, essentially, is how they uh, reduced the trap sequence to save the other two. Um,
Okay. And did they have to do that because of the type of twins they were? They kind of shared certain things? Is I guess I'm not familiar
so
with
they
all
were,
the things.
yeah, they were Modi twins. So because they were identical, they shared a placenta, but luckily they had their own sacs. So that was good. But the trap sequence was taking blood supply from one of the twins. Um,
Okay.
and because the trap sequence again was not a thriving fetus, it was never going to turn into a baby. They said the safest thing was to stop the blood flow to it um, to protect the others. So the RFA was not comfortable. It was like a almost kind of like an amniocentesis but bigger. So a probe that like goes
Oh,
into your belly. Um, it cauterizes the umbilical cord that was going to the trap sequence. It was done in a normal procedure room. There were lots of doctors and lots of ultrasound techs around me. The parents came, so they were there, and then my partner was with me. But it was all of 10 minutes and done. And they stuck a band-aid on my belly and said, okay, you can go home now. And yeah, it
that
was
that was
pretty much,
it.
yeah.
That is wild. So I guess, I mean, I have done three journeys myself, and I'm in the industry and I've heard all sorts of tales and stories. This is obviously a new one, the single embryo splitting three times, and even just this type of reduction procedure.
Yeah.
Um, as far as all of that goes, what did kind of your recovery look like from that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the procedure itself, they numbed my belly with like a local anesthetic. And then when the probe went in, so that I didn't, I mean, I felt it. It wasn't super comfortable, but, I mean, the fact that I got to go in the car, I mean, they didn't want me to drive, but the fact that we drove home that same day and everything was great.
Mm.
Uh, I didn't, they said that the trap sequence would, absorb. And, every ultrasound I had after that, you could kind of see like sediment. in the old, like in the fluid.
Mhm.
Um, but it kind of went away. But I didn't notice I didn't have any spotting. I didn't have any cramping, nothing. It just, at that point, it went to a normal, identical twin pregnancy, as normal as that can be,
Yeah.
um, after that 16-week mark. So, yeah.
So
Yeah.
how did the intended parents kind of take that? Like, so you're in the ultrasound room with all of this. Are you by yourself finding all this news out? Like, what are the thoughts going
Um,
through your head? You seem pretty mellow about it. It
yeah.
kind of seems your demeanor, but you're sitting there and you're like, wait, what? Like, how do you
Yeah.
break that news to the intended parents? Like, so there may be more than one, or did you have the clinic do that? Like, what did that
Yeah.
look like?
Um, I mean, the very first ultrasound when I found out it had split, I just called the parents. The one who I spoke to on the phone, I remember he laughed, and then like I did to the ultrasound tech, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have laughed." And I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh no, I did the same thing. Like, what else are you going to do?" And again, his first thought was, he said, "How are you? Like, are you okay?" Which I thought was just, again, they were so amazing. And I was like, "I'm fine. Like, how are you? You're gonna have more than one baby."
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, every appointment, every step, we had a really good relationship. So I would usually just relay any information to them needed. Um, but then at the RFA procedure, they came and were there. One of them, one of the parents didn't want to be in the procedure room, which I don't blame him. He was like, "I don't want to see that." But then one of the parents was, like, with my partner right there too. So
Well,
yeah.
that's great that they were able to offer that support to you and that you were able to be in that together because even
Yeah.
when you know that it's not a viable pregnancy, I'm sure just the emotional roller coaster that is in general is a lot and then the up and down of it's one, it's three, it's two, it's that I mean that just had to be so much for all of you. And
Yeah.
so you have that at 16 weeks. What did the rest of this identical twin pregnancy look like for you all
Yeah.
moving forward?
I mean, for the most part, it was a normal twin pregnancy at that point. I had lots of doctor's appointments, definitely more than usual.
Yeah.
My MFM doctor, she watched me really closely the whole entire pregnancy. Because essentially when you have that procedure done, they've punctured the uterine lining and your belly is growing every day. So there's definitely a worry.
Yeah.
Um, so I was very closely monitored. But yeah, I mean, I was healthy and everything went how it was supposed to. My water did break pretty early. They were almost 33 weeks, but they were happy I made it past 24 weeks, past 28 weeks, past 32 weeks. So, every like milestone was great. We were hoping I would make it to 34. I actually had a scheduled delivery for 34 weeks, but I barely made it right
Yeah.
before that. But the twins are now 4 and healthy and happy and yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. So were the parents able to make it for the delivery since it came a little earlier than expected?
Missed it. They
Oh,
missed it, but that, it was okay. My water broke really early. They live across the country, so by the time we got a hold of them and everything, and I had a scheduled repeat C-section from
okay.
my daughter's delivery. So I was trying to hold out. I was like, I can wait, but they were like, no, like your water broke and these babies are really little. We need to get them out and safe. Um, so yeah, they did miss it, but honestly, I think it was kind of peaceful for everybody, and they would probably disagree. I think they were scrambling a little bit to try to get here the week sooner than they expected,
Yep.
but by the time they got there, I had recovered. I had the C-section and you have to go through all the recovery, and
Yep.
babies were safe and sound in the NICU. So they just got to like come in and kind of see them quiet in the NICU, and it wasn't as chaotic as the
Yeah.
delivery
I'm
was.
sure I'm sure that was a blessing in disguise that
Yeah.
everything and everybody was stabilized at that point because
Yeah.
I
I
know
think
I had an early twin delivery too, and
yeah.
babies in that very beginning
Yes.
few moments can be a little chaotic and scary for everyone. Even if they're safe, it looks scary when there's so many
Right.
doctors and people
Yeah.
surrounding babies. So it's probably a blessing that they didn't have to that those aren't their first memories of the babies. So I think that's
Totally. And I remember my water broke and, I live really close to the hospital, luckily, but it was like shift change when I came
oh
in.
no.
And so it was just, nurses coming in and leaving. And then, I remember them, check at first they were like, well, we don't really want to check you because like your water broke. So infection, the whole 9 yards. And I was like,
Yeah.
I felt fine. I was having contractions, but I don't know. They weren't that bad, I guess. But
Hmm.
then I remember the doctor, he was like, well, I'm just gonna check you. Like, and he was like, we gotta go. Like, these babies won out. And it
Yep.
was definitely chaotic. And again, it was shift change. I remember like nurses walking in with like, their coffee, their morning just started. And it
Yep.
was like, okay, just kidding. Like,
Yep.
we're going to surgery. So, um, but yeah, it was all things considered, it was great. And again, they were healthy and so was I. And yeah.
That's all you can ask for. So how long did the babies end up having to stay in the NICU? I know early
Yeah.
deliveries can
Um,
and twins can be there for a bit sometimes.
yeah, I think it was like 5, 6 weeks, maybe. The parents had already planned on staying for like a couple months anyways. Um, I think I'm definitely a person that everything happens for a reason.
Yep.
They were born early and it was right before COVID started. So the day they
Oh,
flew home, the day they left was literally the day that like the world was shutting down. And so I think they knew they needed to come early,
yep.
or they might not have been able to get on a plane to go home. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so you said the hospital was close to you. Were you able, what did that kind of postpartum period look like? I know everybody's postpartum interactions with their intended parents looks different, especially with a NICU stay. A
yeah,
lot of times, intended parents, go quickly back to where they're from with babies, and so there's not that opportunity for a whole lot of contact necessarily after because they're gone. Did you see them a whole lot after you went home, or what did your contact look like after delivery?
yeah. Um, Again, I'm super lucky. They were phenomenal. I pumped breast milk for them for the time they were in the NICU, and I would go every day. I would go up there, I would drop off the milk. They were staying in
Awesome.
like an Airbnb close to the hospital, so they weren't there 24/7 either, is to be expected. But, so sometimes I would just go in, say hi to the babies, drop off the milk. The hospital staff knew me. I had like my own bracelet so I could go in and see them. Um, there were times when we had the parents over for dinner and we hung out while the babies were still in the NICU.
Oh, that's
Um, I was super, super fortunate. And I think a lot of surrogate stories are like mine. I know not all of them are, but it was also really nice that it was before COVID, because
yeah.
had it been after COVID, then no, I probably wouldn't have even been allowed to the
Yeah.
hospital. But because it was the time that it was, it really worked out that I could go and visit and hang out. And yeah.
Oh, that's so wonderful. That's amazing. Oh, I just love hearing that you were able to have such a great thing. So they're finally able to go home. What does your relationship look like with your intended parents now?
Yeah. Great. I mean, as involved as it can be, both being busy families and
Yeah.
living across the country from each other. But we text and send pictures. I've gone to visit a couple times. I've stayed with them. My daughter has gone with me to see the twins, and yeah, we're really lucky.
I love that. That's wonderful. Well, I think the funnest part of this story, and I always say spoken like a true surrogate, is you defied the odds here and had this like odd divine pregnancy and delivery and all of these things, and you signed up to do another journey, even knowing that this kind of wild situation happened.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit about how that went, because you kind of went into this, you
Yeah,
transferred another single embryo transfer, right? And you kind of like bracing for it, like, are you sure
absolutely.
there's only one in there? Like, how did
Yes.
that go? Going from
Yeah.
this kind of wild ride to I'm assuming typical pregnancy
Yeah.
moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I remember I was probably 6 months postpartum, maybe a little longer. This was also the thick of COVID at this point, 2020. And I remember reaching out to my agency and I was like, okay, yeah, I want to do it again. And I remember my coordinator and everybody was like, oh my, we did not think you were ever going to want to do this again, but here you are. Um, and so I got approved to do it again. And, I had, I'd had a C-section, so I knew I was going to have to wait, 18 months or more, as advised. And, I ended up, seeing a couple different profiles and nothing felt right. But then I was even more fortunate my second journey. I had made a really good friend who was also a surrogate. We were pregnant at the same time with our first journeys, and her intended parents were looking for another surrogate, and she was already committed to another family. So I ended up carrying their second child. So now I have like a surrogate sister that I've gained out of all of this too, which is really fun.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, it was nice. It was definitely a different journey experience in the fact that I already knew them. I had met
Yep.
them before with her. And so I knew, I had just more information about them and I knew how wonderfully they had treated her and the
Yeah.
relationship that they built. So I feel really lucky to now also be a part of that experience.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that journey was a little bit different. I had um, a medication cycle that failed and we had to start over. We had a transfer that failed, which again, my first time I just did it and it all worked.
Yeah.
Um, so then the second transfer was successful. And yes, every ultrasound appointment until like 20 weeks, I kept asking, are you sure it's only one? Are you sure? I think they got a little sick of me asking that because I was like, no, but really, like, are you sure?
Okay, I would say that is a completely reasonable question to ask at that point. And I think that is such a good kind of thing to point out here is how different every journey can be, how different every cycle can be. Because I know after my second journey, it went so perfectly. I was like, my IPs were perfect. My delivery was amazing. The dads were able to be in the operating room. I was like, everything is just so perfect. I was scared to like try again. So I was like, I
Yeah.
don't know if it can be like that again. And of course it wasn't, but it was perfect in a different way. And that's okay. Every journey is different and it can still be wonderful and amazing just in a different way. And your body responds differently to medications and cycles every time. And it's just amazing to me how you're the same person doing the same thing and your body
Yeah.
can it can be different every time and every match is different and every cycle is different and doesn't mean that you did anything. It's just the
Yep.
nature of the game and that's we're human as much as medical intervention and science comes into play. Things like that happen, but
Yeah.
I I love that you tried again and that I think that was the most shocking thing for me when you and I had our kind of pre-talk was
Yeah.
that after defying all the odds, I was like, and you did it again? You said like, wow. But once I thought about it, I wasn't surprised because that's what surrogates do. Any advice that you would give women considering becoming a surrogate, other than expect the unexpected, I
Yeah.
suppose?
Yeah. I think again, I got really, really lucky and so fortunate both journeys. So I hate to say like, oh, I didn't do enough research or I didn't this because for me, it turned out really, really well. But any advice I would say is do all of your own research, the best that you can first. There are hundreds of Facebook groups that are really informative, sometimes the good, the bad, the ugly. But there's also really good blogs and, even podcasts just like this where you can listen and absorb it all yourself. I don't think it matters if a surrogate goes, if you go independent or with an agency or, in between, whatever that looks like, but you need to be the one to do the research yourself first.
Yep.
Again, the best that you can, because no fault of any surrogacy company, but they can't tell you everything either.
Yeah.
And, I've seen it with acquaintances or friends before of like, oh, well, they didn't tell me that, or I didn't know that. And it's like, well, again, they don't have, trust me, there is not the
Yeah.
resources or bandwidth to tell you everything that
Yep.
could happen. So the best you can do is just your research yourself.
Yep.
And ask questions. No question stupid. No question is too big or too small. Like I still, 5 years later now, I'm still learning new stuff about surrogacy. So,
Yep.
yeah.
And one of the things I heard you mention about your second journey that I think is another wonderful thing to point out here is don't settle. You
Yeah.
said that you had looked through a couple of different intended parent profiles and they just didn't feel right. They didn't feel that click, and that's okay. It's just as much your journey as it is about intended parents. And just because you are presented with a profile, if
Yeah.
it doesn't feel that, I mean, there's a lot that goes into these journeys. It's a lot of time and emotional investment. And if you don't feel that kind of connection from the start with somebody, it can make for a very long and hard journey, and you want it to feel good and you want it to feel right from the beginning. And so don't settle. And I love that you didn't. And it
Yeah.
seemed right because in the end, you ended up finding another perfect and amazing journey that was different than your first, but it was right because you waited. And I think it's wonderful that you were able to advocate that for yourself and voice that, because a lot of the time, with a great agency, so a lot of the time those first matches and those first
Yeah.
profiles are the ones, but sometimes they're not, and that's
Yeah.
okay. And I think that's
Yeah.
a big thing to point out. And I love that you were able to do that for yourself.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great call out. And even my first journey, I had seen a profile before the parents that I ended up matching with. And, I politely passed. And I remember saying to my coordinator, like, I felt so guilty. I felt so bad saying no. And she was like, it's okay. Like there's others out there, or, whatever the case may be. But I think surrogates, the one thing we all have in common for the most part is we are people pleasers and we don't want to let anyone down. And so I can see how a lot of surrogates do have a hard time saying, no, that just doesn't look right. Or I don't know, something about their profile I'm not a fan of.
Yes.
Um, Go with that feeling and there will be another family that you
Yeah.
get to help.
It
So
is so hard to stand up and advocate for that. And it does. Like I said, it feels icky. I always hated that, even just in the application stage, where they ask, are there any types of intended parents that you're not comfortable carrying for, gay, straight,
yeah,
whatever that case may be.
yeah,
And even starting there and having to put that down, you feel bad because you don't want to have to
yeah,
say that, but it matters, and your whole journey, it is about you and helping other people, and it's okay to say no, but yeah, it's easier said than done. Well, I just think that it is wonderful. I love having these chats with women who have been surrogates, who we can kind of help spread awareness about what surrogacy really is and what the process is actually like, and these situations that can come up. I mean, I will say yours is very rare. Did they give you a percentage on like how rare a single split to
cool.
three was? Because that seems
Yeah.
pretty rare up in there.
I mean, all the specialists that I saw at one of like the best hospitals near Seattle, they kept saying they'd never seen it before, but they were like, it's less than a percent, you know, but I was there first. So
Yeah, that's just wild. So Expect the unexpected in surrogacy. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Normalized Surrogacy podcast by Surrogacy Mentor. I want to thank our very special guest, Sammi, for joining us for this chat today. Be sure to check us out online at surrogacymentor.com and modernparentmentor.com if you're interested in knowing whether surrogacy is right for you, and take our 2-minute easy quiz on our website if you're interested in becoming a surrogate. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to learn more about gestational surrogacy and how to have a safe, ethical, and enjoyable surrogacy journey. Talk to you next time.